For over 7 decades, the world has witnessed the Kim dynasty rule in North Korea with absolute power and mystery. This family has turned the country into one of the most isolated and enigmatic regimes, leaving many both fascinated and concerned. But how have they managed to achieve and maintain such dominance despite global pressure? Therefore, today's video aims to understand their methods and legacy, which is essential for decoding North Korea's policies and its tense position on the international stage. The Japanese occupation and early resistance. The roots of the Kim dynasty trace back to the early 20th century during the Japanese occupation of Korea, 1910 to 1945. The occupation was marked by harsh repression, cultural assimilation policies, and economic exploitation. Koreans were dehumanized and stripped of their national identity, fueling widespread resentment and the rise of resistance movements. Kim Il-sung was born in the turbulent context on April 15, 1912, into a poor but patriotic family with a history of resistance against Japanese imperial rule. Kim Il-sung engaged in guerrilla activities from a very young age, particularly during the 1930s when he joined the anti-Japanese resistance movement in Manchuria. During this time, he led guerrilla units in battles against the Japanese army. His leadership skills and resilient spirit quickly made him a prominent figure within the communist resistance forces in East Asia. His dedication to the liberation of Korea and participation in numerous battles against Japanese forces helped him build the image of a devoted freedom fighter. World War II and the division of Korea. The conclusion of World War II brought significant changes to the Korean peninsula. The surrender of Japan in 1945 left a power vacuum that was quickly filled by the two emerging superpowers, the United States and the Soviet Union. Without consulting the Korean people, the Allies agreed to divide Korea along the 38th parallel, ostensibly as a temporary measure. The Soviet Union occupied the north, while the United States took control of the south. The division sowed the seeds of future conflict. In the north, the Soviets sought a leader who could advance communist interests and maintain order. They chose Kim Il-sung, viewing him as a pliable figure who could be molded to serve their strategic objectives. Despite being relatively unknown among Koreans, Kim was installed as the head of the Provisional People's Committee for North Korea in 1946. Consolidation of power and outbreak of the Korean War. Initially perceived as a Soviet puppet, Kim Il-sung faced skepticism from his compatriots. However, he leveraged his guerrilla credentials and nationalist rhetoric to garner support. He portrayed himself as the embodiment of Korean resistance against foreign oppression, tapping into the collective desire for independence and reunification. Kim's ambition to rule a united Korea led him to seek approval from Joseph Stalin to invade the South, believing that the South Korean populace yearned for liberation and that the United States would not intervene decisively. Kim launched a surprise attack on June 25, 1950, igniting the Korean War. The war was devastating. It lasted 3 years and resulted in the deaths of over 1 million North Koreans. The United States and its allies intervened on behalf of South Korea, while China entered the conflict to support the North. The fighting eventually stalemated near the original dividing line, and an armistice was signed in 1953. The war ended with Korea still divided, and the 38th parallel remained a stark boundary between two ideologically opposed states, establishing a totalitarian regime. The failure to reunify Korea didn't diminish Kim Il-sung's resolve. Instead, it prompted him to tighten his grip on power and eliminate any opposition. The post-war period saw the implementation of a brutal purge of perceived enemies. Kim established a caste system known as Songbun, which categorized citizens based on their perceived loyalty to the regime. The population was divided into 3 main classes: the core class of loyalists, the wavering class, and the hostile class. Those deemed hostile faced severe repercussions, including execution or incarceration in labor camps, along with their entire families. This systemic repression served multiple purposes. It eradicated dissent, instilled fear, and reinforced Kim's absolute authority. By controlling every aspect of citizens' lives and punishing even the slightest deviation from the party line, Kim ensured that any potential threats to his rule were swiftly neutralized. Propaganda and the construction of a godlike leader. Central to Kim Il-sung's strategy was the development of an extensive propaganda apparatus designed to elevate his status to that of a demigod. The Bureau of Propaganda and Agitation played a pivotal role in shaping the nation's consciousness. Through relentless indoctrination, the regime prompted the notion that Kim was the benevolent father of the nation, responsible for providing food, clothing, and shelter to all. Kim Jong-il, his son, proved instrumental in amplifying this cult of personality. As a young man, he demonstrated a keen understanding of propaganda's power. He orchestrated campaigns that portrayed his father as the savior of the Korean people, erasing any acknowledgement of Soviet influence in Kim Il-sung's rise to power. Massive status and portraits of Kim were erected throughout the country, and citizens were required to display reverence towards his image. Elimination of religion and the total social control. To cement the Kim family's supremacy, traditional religions and belief systems were systemically eradicated. Churches, temples, and religious texts were destroyed or repurposed to serve the state's interests. In their place, a quasi-religious reverence for the Kim dynasty was instilled. The regime became the ultimate authority on moral and ethical matters, and loyalty to the Kim family was equated with patriotism and righteousness. Education and media were tightly controlled to prevent the infiltration of foreign ideas. The regime sought to create a homogeneous society where dissent was unthinkable. This isolation from the outside world reinforced the regime's narratives and prevented the populace from accessing alternative viewpoints. The value of an external enemy. Kim Il-sung recognized the utility of having a formidable external enemy to unify the nation and justify his authoritarian measures. The United States, with its military presence in South Korea and its leading role in the Korean War, was the perfect antagonist. By portraying America as an imperialist aggressor poised to invade at any moment, Kim kept his population in a constant state of vigilance and dependence on his leadership for protection. The Blue House Raid. In January 1968, Kim orchestrated an audacious attempt to assassinate South Korean President Park Chung-hee. A team of 31 elite North Korean commandos infiltrated the Demilitarized Zone (DMZ) with the objective of attacking the Blue House, South Korea's presidential residence. The mission was intended to incite chaos and potentially spark an uprising in the South that would pave the way for unification under Kim's rule. The operation failed when the commandos were intercepted just miles from their target. A fierce firefight ensued, resulting in the deaths of most of the North Korean operatives. The incident had the opposite effect of what Kim intended. Rather than inspiring admiration or support, it galvanized South Korean opposition to the North and led to widespread condemnation of Kim's regime. The capture of the USS Pueblo. Later in 1968, Kim seized another opportunity to challenge the United States directly. The USS Pueblo, an American naval intelligence vessel, was conducting surveillance off the coast of North Korea when it was intercepted and captured by North Korean forces. The 82 crew members were taken prisoner, and one was killed during the assault. The incident escalated tensions between the United States and North Korea. President Lyndon B. Johnson faced a difficult decision: retaliate military and risk a broader conflict, or seek a diplomatic resolution. With the Vietnam War already stretching American military resources, Johnson opted for negotiation. Another 11 months of captivity and under pressure, the U.S. government signed a coerced apology to secure the release of the crew, although it retracted the apology upon their safe return. For Kim Il-sung, the Pueblo incident was a propaganda victory. He showcased the captured Americans as proof of his ability to stand up to the United States, reinforcing his image as a strong leader defending his nation against imperialist threats. The axe murder incident at the DMZ. In 1976, another confrontation occurred at the DMZ, known as the Axe Murder Incident. American and South Korean soldiers attempted to trim a poplar tree that obstructed the line of the site between observation posts. Unbeknownst to them, the North Koreans considered the tree to be symbolic, allegedly planted by Kim Il-sung himself. A group of North Korean soldiers confronted the work party, and a violent altercation ensued. 2 American officers were killed with axes used by the tree trimming crew. The incident prompted the United States to launch Operation Polonian, a massive show of force intended to intimidate the North Koreans, backed by bombers, aircraft carriers, and additional troops. The Americans returned to the site and cut down the tree entirely. Fearing escalation and lacking support from China and the Soviet Union, North Korea issued a statement of regret, a rare concession from Kim's regime. The incident demonstrated that while Kim was willing to engage in Brinkmanship, he was also pragmatic when faced with overwhelming military might and potential for devastating retaliation. Psychological manipulation and control. Throughout these confrontations, Kim Il-sung adeptly manipulated the psychology of his people and his adversaries by creating crisis and then positioning himself as the defender of the nation. He maintained internal cohesion and justified his authoritarian role. The perpetual state of external threat allowed him to divert attention from domestic shortcomings and suppress dissent under the guise of national security.
Enemies, real or perceived, were essential to the regime's narrative. The United States served as the primary antagonist, but internal enemies were also identified and purged to eliminate potential rivals and instill fear. The regime's propaganda emphasized the heroism of the Kim family in resisting foreign aggression, fostering a culture of hyper-nationalism and unquestioning loyalty.
International isolation and self-reliance. Kim's confrontational approach led to increasing isolation from the international community as relations with China and the Soviet Union became strained, particularly after China's reapproachment with the United States. North Korea adopted the ideology of Jochi, or self-reliance. This philosophy prompted economic and political independence, further entrenching the country's isolation. The pursuit of self-reliance had severe consequences for the North Korean economy. Resources were diverted to military and nuclear programs at the expense of civilian needs. Famine and hardship became widespread, but the regime's control over information prevented the populace from understanding the extent of their deprivation relative to the outside world. Kim Il-sung's later years and nuclear ambitions. As he aged, Kim Il-sung became increasingly focused on securing his legacy and ensuring the continuation of his dynasty. One of his key objectives was the development of a nuclear weapons program. He viewed nuclear capabilities as essential for deterring external threats and solidifying North Korea's status as a formidable power. The nuclear program began in earnest in the 1980s. With assistance from Soviet and Chinese technology, the pursuit of nuclear weapons further isolated North Korea as it violated non-proliferation agreements and alarmed the international community. The rise of Kim Jong-il. Preparing for succession, Kim Il-sung groomed his son, Kim Jong-il, to take over the leadership. Kim Jong-il had already established himself within the regime through his work in propaganda and arts. He was responsible for the production of elaborate films and spectacles that glorified his father and the regime. Transition in power in totalitarian state posed challenges. Kim Jong-il faced the daunting task of stepping into the shoes of a leader who had been defied. To facilitate the transfer of authority, a similar cult of personality was constructed around him. State media began to ascribe superhuman qualities to Kim Jong-il, portraying him as the dear leader with unparalleled wisdom and abilities. Challenges of succeeding a godlike leader. The succession process highlighted the inherent difficulties in maintaining a hereditary dictatorship. While Kim Jong-il held significant power, he lacked the revolutionary credentials of his father. He had not fought in wars or participated in the liberation struggle, making it necessary to fabricate achievements and enhance his image through propaganda. To consolidate his authority, Kim Jong-il continued many of his father's policies, including strict social control and the emphasis on military strength. He intensified the pursuit of nuclear weapons and engaged in provocations similar to those of his father, such as missile tests and border skirmishes. Conclusion. The Kim dynasty's rise to power and the subsequent shaping of North Korea into an isolated totalitarian state is a testament to the potent combination of ideology, propaganda, and ruthless control. Kim Il-sung capitalized on the historical wounds inflicted by foreign powers to position himself as the savior of his nation. Through systemic purges, social engineering, and the construction of a cult of personality, he established an unassailable position atop the North Korean hierarchy. Understanding the origins and mechanisms of the Kim dynasty is crucial for interpreting North Korea's current behavior on the global stage. The regime's emphasis on military strength, particularly nuclear capabilities, is rooted in a historical narrative of vulnerability and the need for self-reliance. The psychological manipulation of the populace and the portrayal of external enemies continues to serve as tools for maintaining internal cohesion and justifying authoritarian rule. Under Kim Jong-un, the third-generation leader, North Korea has continued along the path laid by his grandfather and father. The development of nuclear weapons and intercontinental ballistic missiles has brought the country into direct confrontation with the United States and its allies. Despite international sanctions and diplomatic pressures, the regime persists in its pursuit of strategic deterrence. The Kim dynasty's endurance raises profound questions about the nature of power, ideology, and the human capacity for control. It highlights the challenges faced by the international community in addressing the threats posed by a regime that operates under a vastly different set of values and perceptions. As the world grapples with the implications of North Korea's actions, a deep understanding of historical and psychological foundations of the Kim dynasty remains essential.